I'm joined now by Lee Strobel. He's the author of The Case for Christ, which is how a lot of you probably know him from his journey from being an atheist to being a believer and now as an apologist. And I wanted to get your thoughts first. Because of the passing of Ravi Zacharias, just your opinion of him, the impact he had on your life, and I know that you had the chance to interview him a while ago for one of your books.
Yeah, he was a friend. He was a incredible apologist, a defender of the faith. He was fearless. He was a cultural prophet. He spoke boldly into our culture, but at the same time, he had this winsome way about him. Everybody who met Ravi walked away feeling like Ravi's my friend. And so I love the man. I think he's had a huge impact around the globe. And I want to see more people like him. That's why we started the Strobel Center for Evangelism and Applied Apologetics at Colorado Christian University to train people online to be able to articulate not just what they believe, but why they believe it.
And that's a perfect segue because I was going to ask you, in the age of so much skepticism, there's so much information available online that can lead you in one way or the other regarding the matters of faith. Why is it so important that people understand apologetics these days? Because I think it's a topic that is confusing to a lot of people.
It is. Apologetics has two roles. Apologetics, of course, isn't about apologizing. It's about giving a defense or reasons why we believe. And it does two things. For Christians, it deepens our faith and our confidence in the truth of Christianity, thereby making it more likely that we're going to share that with other people. And then secondly, it's important to reach people in our culture, which, as you said, is increasingly skeptical and often hostile toward the Christian message. Many of our friends and neighbors and colleagues and even family members have what I call spiritual sticking points. Those are those questions or objections or doubts that are holding them up in their journey toward God. And if we can help them get past those sticking points, often they can make great progress toward the cross. So I think I agree with my friend J. Warner Wallace, former atheist who became a Christian through investigating the evidence. And he said that evangelism in the 21st century is spelled apologetics. In other words, we're not going to be able to share our faith effectively in the 21st century unless we can also give reasonable explanations for why we believe what we believe.
And I think a lot of lay people or people who are not studied in apologetics will look at someone like Ravi Zacharias, or they'll look at someone like you, Lee Strobel, and think that's something that they've spent their life pouring into this and studying this. It's a bit too lofty for me to take on. How can we make apologetics maybe more accessible to people who don't have the capacity to study it full time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we can all grow, we can all learn. There's some basic questions that people who are skeptics or spiritual seekers will commonly ask. How can you trust the New Testament? How can Jesus be the only way to God? Why would a loving God allow pain and suffering? There are, about 8 main objections that people raise. I deal with them in my book, The Case for Faith, which, by the way, I interviewed Ravi for that book. And the question is, Jesus the only way to God? And so we can learn some basic answers like that. And it'll deepen our own faith while at the same time preparing us to share faith with others. So what we've done, we've gathered about 30 PhDs from around the nation. And we're creating 181 online courses. They're 5 weeks long each that will equip people on how to be able to share their faith and defend it. And people can just take one course if they want, or they can get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. If they go to strobelcenter.com, it'll take you to all the information. But that's our effort to try to equip the next generation. I was at the funeral of Billy Graham. And the big question at Billy Graham's funeral was, well, who's the next Billy Graham? And my answer is, it's not one person. It's millions of contagious Christians who are trained to naturally and effectively share the gospel and defend it as being true. That is going to reach our nation for Christ. That is going to reach our world for Christ.
And anyone who's followed your story or has seen the movie The Case for Christ, I actually have the poster back here on my wall.
Oh,
Uh,
awesome.
it was one of my favorite movies of 2017, I think was the year that it came
It
out.
was. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
fantastic movie. And like I said, for anyone who's followed your story, they know, or seen the movie, they know that miracles played a critical role in your faith journey and your coming to Christ. How can believers maybe find the logical space that miracles fit into the faith?
Yeah, another great question. I was an atheist, trained in journalism and law. And what brought me to faith in Christ is I spent 2 years focused primarily on investigating the miracle of the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. Did he claim to be the Son of God? Yeah. Did he prove it by returning from the dead? That's what I wanted to know. And I concluded that the evidence for that miracle historically is so strong, I concluded that he is who he claimed to be, the Son of God. But then I wondered, what about modern miracles? What about, does God still doing miracles today? There's a lot of stories, and there have been some fraudulent things going on and maybe some overhype and so forth. So I spent another 2 years investigating miracles today. And I did a book called The Case for Miracles, which is now out in paperback. And one of the points of my book is that miracles probably happen a lot more often than we think they do. And a lot of miracles are better documented than we think. In other words, there have been scientific studies that have pointed toward the veracity of modern miracles. And in fact, just recently, there was another peer-reviewed medical journal that carried a case study of a woman who was blind for over a dozen years with juvenile macular degeneration. She used a cane to get around. She read Braille. She was educated at a school for the blind. She married a Baptist pastor. One night, he prayed for her and said, God, I know you can heal her right now. Heal her tonight. And they prayed that. She opened her eyes and she could see.
Wow.
And this is, so all the medical evidence is documented in that case study. It's been 47 years since that happened. And her eyesight's been fine ever since. Now, what do you do with that? Science can't prove a miracle because science deals with the natural world. This is a supernatural situation. But when we have solid documentation, when we have medical evidence, when we have multiple credible witnesses who have no motive to deceive, when there are no natural explanations for this, and when it occurs in the context of prayer, I think the reasonable conclusion is that a miracle has taken place.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for anybody who's interested in learning more about apologetics, learning more about the Strobel Center at Colorado Christian University, where can they go for more information to learn about that and also to learn about you?
Yeah, if they go to Strobel Center, Strobel Center, one word.com, it'll take you to all the information. We're launching our first 30 courses online this fall, so people can register now. We have courses like Science and Faith, world missions and world religions and cults. We have a whole course on the resurrection of Jesus, on dealing with objections to Christianity, of Islam and Christianity, of studies in apologetics and the arts, things like social media and movies and so forth. So there's some wonderful opportunities for people to either take one course and kind of grow personally, or get a master's degree, or get a bachelor's degree, or a minor if they have some other area of study.
Yeah. And then the last question I want to ask you is just as states are beginning to reopen, we're beginning to come out of some of the pandemic that we've been dealing with for these past 2-3 months. The problem of evil is a big question that people are dealing with. They're wondering, how can a good God allow something like this to happen? And I know that's a big question and too hard to unpack in a few minutes. But what kind of encouragement might you be able to give our Faithwire listeners and readers dealing with that struggle?
Yeah, Jesus was honest. There are other religious leaders who say that suffering, like the suffering we've endured in this pandemic, is Maya. It's an illusion. It doesn't really, well, baloney. It's real. And Jesus was honest. Jesus said this in John 16:33. He said, I tell you these things so that you may have peace. In this world, you're going to have suffering. You're going to have trouble. But take courage. I have overcome the world. So what's he doing there? He's acknowledging that we live in a sin-stained world. a world infected by sin at every level. And that's why we have horrible things like pandemics happen to us. But in that same verse, he says, I can give you the two very things you need the most. Number one, peace for the present. And number two, courage to face the future. That's what we need. And that's what we find in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end the interview. Thank you so much, Lee, for talking with us, and I appreciate your insight and your voice here.
Well, thank you. God bless you and your viewers. I appreciate you.
Thanks.